Hello F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. You're with me, David and Harry, and F1 is finally back. We witnessed the Australian Grand Prix, a lot of rain, a lot of chaos, and now we'll discuss it. We can start with the practice sessions where we saw Haas struggling, we saw McLaren being very fast as the whole weekend, and a lot of promise from Williams as before that, during the testing, we saw a lot of good things from them, from Albon and Sainz. And I think during the season, we can witness a lot of great performances from Williams. Your thoughts about the practice?
Yeah, practice. I had quite high hopes after practice because it seemed like the top teams were fairly close. I thought Ferrari looked really good in practice. Mercedes as well, especially on the long runs. Red Bull were struggling quite a lot on Friday. On Saturday, they seemed to turn things around, at least with Verstappen. But I thought it set up a really interesting and I thought competitive qualifying session, but that didn't really prove to be the case.
Haas were bottom of the field, P19 and 20. Oli Berman didn't even set a lap, and it's worrying for them. Let's see how the season goes, but I don't see much promise in them. Also, Liam Lawson was P18. This was horrible. I mean, he was nowhere in this qualifying.
I forgot to mention that also Oli Berman, he crashed in 2 out of the 3 practice sessions, and in the third one, he didn't drive because his car was broken from the first crash. And yeah, his gearbox failed on him at the beginning of qualifying, but Haas were so bad. I knew I thought they were gonna be at least better than Sauber, but oh my god, they're comfortably the worst team on the grid. It's very concerning.
I hope we don't see the same season as, was it 2021 where Haas were bottom of the field, but during the season Magnussen and Romain Grosjean, they were always 19th, 20th.
You mean the year with Mazepin and Schumacher?
I think it was 21.
Is it?
Mazepin and Schumacher, when they had their historically bad season.
Yeah, this one. Okay, my bad. But still, I don't see any promise in them. I hope they can turn things just a bit so that we don't have a bottom team that is set for 19th and 20th in every race. But what was disappointing for me, as Harry mentioned, Liam Lawson being P18, also Kimi Antonelli, both of them being out in Q1, that wasn't very promising. At least Kimi managed to turn around his result during the weekend, but we'll talk about that later.
We have to mention Isaac Hadjar, who was best of all rookies. He finished P11. He was really close to Q3, but he made a good impression in qualifying. And moving on to top 10, Ferrari were P7 and P8. This was quite a shocker for all Ferrari fans.
I mean, Ferrari were miserable. I mean, somehow their qualifying was better than the race, which is pretty much, it just speaks for itself. But yeah, Lewis Hamilton, extremely inconsistent with his car. It felt like his lap times were completely different every lap, and although he keeps saying in interviews still learning the environment, still learning the car, and still learning everything. You had 250 laps of testing. You had additional testing on the Ferrari track. You had 3 practice sessions. Also, when you look at people like Kimi Antonelli, who drove his first F1 race ever, I don't see why is it so hard for a 7-time world champion to adjust to a different team compared to drivers that have never even raced an F1 car before. So his excuses, in my opinion, were quite lackluster, and he did not have a great weekend at all. But other people that did have a great qualifying, at least, Alex Albon P6 and Yuki Tsunoda P5, that Racing Bull car looking really promising. And at the front, McLaren, even though after some shaky first laps, they got the 1-2 quite comfortably over Max Verstappen and George Russell.
It was looking quite promising for Alpine too, I think, because Pierre Gasly was 9th and also Jack Doohan with not the best but also not the worst qualifying session, being 14th. But during the race we saw that it turned out to be the worst scenario for Alpine. And P3 for Max Verstappen, I think he's taking the maximum of the car, but it is not looking good for Red Bull, and their whole hope for what is going to happen throughout the season lays on the shoulders of Verstappen, at least for now. We'll see what is going to happen with Liam Lawson, but for now it is not looking very promising.
And we can move on to the race recap and start with the podium positions. So third place for George Russell, second place for Max Verstappen, and P1 for Lando Norris. And we had quite a few DNFs. We had Isaac Hadjar, Jack Doohan, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, Gabriel Bortoleto, and Liam Lawson. And maybe let's discuss the race start. Quite a few things happened. Even before the race started, Isaac Hadjar binned it in the wall in the first corner. It was quite disappointing to see. After that, Lewis Hamilton's dad comforted him because Hadjar was crying, and Helmut Marko made some comments about this. What did you guys think?
I mean, I'll talk about Helmut Marko later because somehow I can't stand him more than the FIA president, which is crazy. But Isaac Hadjar, I mean, great qualifying. He had a great weekend, actually. He was looking really promising. Unfortunate, clumsy incident on the formation lap. I won't go too hard on him. It's his first race, and it was soaking wet in Australia. And that's why we saw many rookies DNF the race, because they had never driven a Formula 1 car in the wet. Well, they'd never driven a Formula 1 car to begin with, so it's a shame. I really thought he had a good chance for points, but I think he'll bounce back from this. He looked promising. I was generally impressed with his performance throughout the weekend.
I think it's just a very bad luck for all the rookies that was their first F1 race, because Australia can be tricky, and especially in the rain and with the ever-changing conditions during the weekend. Like it was raining, after that it stopped, it started raining again, and they weren't that comfortable in their cars yet. So I think it was only logical that they're going to struggle. But 5 rookies being out during the first race, it is a bit concerning, but I hope they can turn the things around. Another very young driver in the face of Fernando Alonso. He also had problems and he also DNF'd, but despite that, his teammate showed once again very random great performance from Lance Stroll in the rain, which was, I cannot explain it, but every time it rains, I think Lance Stroll is just becoming at least above average F1 racing driver, which is super strange for me. And talking about the DNFs, the last one is of Carlos Sainz, which for me was especially disappointing because Williams, they were looking very promising this weekend. And I think if he didn't DNF, then both Williams would have been in the points, and that would have been super great head start of the season for them. But we'll see what is going to happen. Let's move on to Kimi Antonelli, to Mercedes.
Yeah, Kimi Antonelli, he qualified P16, and from what I saw, he had a broken floor in Q1, which caused him to lose a lot of pace. But in the race, he was looking promising. First of all, on lap 1, he almost lost the car right behind Jack Doohan, but he saved it and continued on and started making overtakes, and he overtook Nico Hülkenberg, which was the first overtake of the race, actually, and it was around lap 15, because we had a safety car for 8 laps. And yeah, it was a good move. Then he spun the car same way as George Russell did in practice, but then later on re-overtook Nico Hülkenberg as well, and really started making some progress and set his sights on the top 10. And when Alonso crashed, he had just gone up to P10, and I was thinking at that point, he'll get a point or two, things like that. But great tire decisions, when to pit and jumping up into the top 5, and then making an overtake on Alex Albon in that rain for P4 on your first race, 18-year-old, second youngest driver in F1 history, I believe, or third youngest driver. So incredible.
And before we continue with the race recap, what do you think about Mercedes' performance? Do you think that with Russell and Antonelli looking promising from the first race, do you think that Mercedes for now can be the second fastest team on the grid?
I don't know if they have the pace, but they are super consistent. Their car, what you're gonna get out of that car. It's not as, I guess, volatile as the Red Bull or the Ferrari. It seems you know what you're gonna get out of it, and the drivers, they will get the best out of that car. At least I think I see that. I've seen that with George Russell since the start of his Mercedes career, pretty much, he has been trying to get the best result possible, and for the most part, he gets it, and he got a podium as well. So I think that they look really good, and I don't think they have what it takes to beat McLaren, but I could definitely see them, at least in the early part of the season, to be in that top two of the championship.
I agree. It also really depends on Ferrari and how they're gonna turn out to be, because the first race was not like really showing what they are capable of. So, but for now, I think that Mercedes definitely are P2 contenders.
We can move on to the top of the field, and Verstappen, he had quite I can describe it a bit as a boring race according to his standards, but he was pretty consistent throughout the whole race. Like he was relatively close to Piastri and to Norris before the second safety car. But after that, he made a mistake and Piastri managed to overtake him. But after that, he managed to stay consistent. And after that, he was like, oh yeah, let's pit for new tires. And everything seemed alright for him. And even the car was not looking great, but still he managed to get the maximum out of it. And second place overall, I think it was pretty fine weekend. And talking about Oscar Piastri, I had pretty high hopes for him actually. When I saw the qualifying, I expected a tough battle between him and Lando Norris for the win. And actually, we could have had that, but he made a very costly mistake. And I actually expected him to be out of the race after I saw that, but he managed to get back to the race after that, pit for new tires, and just find a way to secure at least some points. But I'm sure that he's going to be very disappointed with himself because his podium was looking secure. Even his second place was looking very, very secure. And talking about his performance and overall McLaren's performance, what do you think about what we discussed earlier? Team orders, or after that, the lack of team orders? It was a bit strange.
So McLaren, I mean, I'm once again disappointed in the way they handled this race. Oscar Piastri was faster than Lando Norris. He gets right onto the back of him. They tell him to hold position. And I would assume that would mess up his concentration. And he made a slight mistake, ran wide where Fernando Alonso crashed. Lost a little bit of time, and then they told him, you're free to race when you're 3 seconds back, which makes no sense. You're at your home Grand Prix. I thought he was phenomenal, and I thought that up until that point, he probably deserved to win that more than Lando. Then obviously they both made the same mistake. Just Oscar he got back onto the track a little too late, and his tires were not ready. But I think that this race proved that Oscar Piastri can be a title contender. Of course, he lost points, but round 1 out of 24, plenty of time to get that back. He has the pace, very close in qualifying. Great race pace, got past Max Verstappen, and did not let his teammate get out of sight whatsoever. So I'm very confident with this result. Even though the result wasn't good, his performance was great, and I'm confident that Oscar Piastri is going to have a phenomenal season, really.
I agree with you, and I also didn't expect him to be so strong. Even though he made a mistake, as Vasco said, there is a long time until the season ends, so let's see.
And can we address the elephant in the room now with Ferrari's performance? Overall, the qualifying, as we said, was disappointing, but the race was looking even worse. Charles Leclerc, he had a strange race, if I can describe it that way. And Lewis Hamilton, the whole race was looking very disappointing for him. He had a lot of very hard time being behind Alex Albon throughout the whole race. And there were other problems that made a lot of memes after that with what was happening with both cars, and strange team communication that was looking unclear at times. Just this race wasn't looking good for Ferrari in any manner, and I don't know if they can. I'm sure actually that they can turn this around, but there should be some hard work, and especially I think from Lewis Hamilton, because for now it is looking that this car doesn't really fit him.
Charles Leclerc, his race was it was terrible for his standards. I mean, like, I'm usually like aware of the fact that Charles Leclerc will try to get the best out of that car, and usually very strong qualifying. He didn't have a strong qualifying. He made a mistake on his second lap and didn't even finish it. And in the race, he made a good start, but his pace was not really there. Ferrari's decisions were so indecisive. Like, Lewis Hamilton was left out on the track, like, and it is like pouring with rain and he is still on the track. I mean, why are they so indecisive? I don't know. It felt like for them it was more important to say to themselves, or for the world to see, Lewis Hamilton is leading the Australian Grand Prix in a Ferrari, please take the pictures. And they were probably like, stop the count, but the race still had more to go, and they pit and they were at the end of the top 10. Leclerc's team radio, I mean, that leakage, there's so much water in the cockpit. Must be the water. I mean, this is like, I mean, I know Ferrari are clowns, but last year I thought they had resolved all these dumb situations and dumb strategies, but Charles Leclerc, terrible race, and somehow it was better than Lewis Hamilton's. And Charles Leclerc spun as well. I also forgot to mention that he got overtaken by Yuki Tsunoda the lap before. Lewis Hamilton could not overtake Alex Albon, like, to save his life, even though he was right behind him. Kimi Antonelli was braver on overtakes than Lewis Hamilton today. I mean, come on. You're like one of the most experienced drivers in history, arguably the greatest driver in history. You should be able to make that move. So what if it's the wet? It's your first race with Ferrari. I mean, and the K1 button, I mean, I guarantee you, he still has not used that button to this day. But yeah, it goes back to my earlier point where you had all this testing. Why are you so confused during the entire race? Did you not talk these things over? Did you not sit down with your engineer and talk, okay, this button, you'll use it to overtake, and you'll use it at this gap from the other driver, so on and so forth? It seems like he's done nothing of that. It seems like he has been by himself until it felt like that was his first day with Ferrari. And yeah, he got overtaken by Charles Leclerc on the restart. Crazy move. And Piastri's move on him on the last lap was even crazier. And P10, 1 point, but it is the second worst Ferrari debut in the 21st century. So Lewis Hamilton needs to get a grip of himself and start performing to the level that is expected of him.
I agree. It was a race to forget for him and Ferrari, and I mean, if they don't improve, it's not looking good. But maybe it was like due to conditions and a lot of factors. Yeah.
This race is probably like
a one-off.
It's a one-off, definitely. Yeah. This is not Ferrari's outright pace. I mean, in the future races, they'll be contending for the podiums because they're still Ferrari. They have a car. They have great drivers. And it's just one of those races, you know? It's like, it reminds me of Canada last year, you know? Crazy race, and they just couldn't handle the conditions.
I agree. Maybe we should also discuss some of the crashes that happened, like more toward the end of the race. Liam Lawson and Gabriel Bortoleto. I think that in Bortoleto's case, it was something wrong with the car because I saw that the wheel disengaged before he even touched the wall. So maybe there was like a failure of the suspension. I don't know.
And about the Liam Lawson crash, the whole weekend, I think, for Lawson was just off. And I hope he can turn things around because right now it is only one race and the comparisons between him and Checo already started. So definitely not a great weekend for him. Not great weekend for Red Bull either. Like Max got everything out of the car, but still things are not looking great.
This car is just terrible. I mean, I don't blame Liam Lawson at all because he's the fourth driver to experience this. And the past three drivers I would consider outside of their Red Bull careers are great drivers. And I think this car is just so bad because, okay, it's made to tailor Max Verstappen's driving style, but if Max Verstappen is such a good driver and one of the greatest drivers of all time, which he is, make a car that the second driver can actually understand and can actually control. And if Max Verstappen is so great, he'll be able to drive that car to great heights as well. Like, I don't understand this sole focus on one driver. And because it doesn't matter if Liam Lawson's in that car, it doesn't matter if it's Sergio Perez, Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, they'll all get knocked out in Q1 because that car is undrivable, it's so unstable, it is so unfocused, and I don't know what to expect from Liam Lawson, and what am I supposed to expect when he has such equipment? I mean, they might as well not even show up with a second car because only one person can drive this car. And how many points is Liam Lawson going to score this season? He was so bad in Q1. He was less than a tenth quicker than Esteban Ocon. I mean, what are we talking about here? You remove Max Verstappen from that car and put, let's say, Sergio Perez and Liam Lawson next to each other. I don't think this team finishes like higher than 7th in the constructors. Like, you can tell me what you think, but I think that Red Bull need to get their act together and actually make a car that any driver can drive and not just one person.
I'm not sure that this is exactly the case. Like, the car is pretty bad, yeah, but I think also it is very demotivating for the other drivers that are not called Max Verstappen, that even in a bad car, he can get his settings and everything right to at least get more than the car is capable of. And when it is your first day in the office, in this case with Lawson, his first race for Red Bull, and he's not really familiar with the car, and I don't think he manages to get everything like exactly great together so that he can feel at least a bit comfortable in that car. We saw like the worst case scenario at this point, because I think if Red Bull made a car that is like relatively easy and comfortable to drive from both drivers, I think it would be slower than the car right now. And I'm not sure that, at least when you have Max Verstappen in your team, I don't think that decision is worth it. And if Max ever leaves, then I think definitely this is going to be the strategy for Red Bull. But right now, when you know that you can have a relatively bad car that can be driven by somebody, Max Verstappen in this case, that can be driven greatly by somebody, and if that car manages to get you podiums, I don't think that the strategy with having an alright car that can be driven by the second driver too, like, definitely I think this can work, but I think it would cost Verstappen.
What would it cost him? Because the car is already like an alright car. It's not better than the Mercedes, not better than the Ferrari.
That's true. I think that it's the fourth best car right now.
I want to ask you, do you think Liam Lawson would have done better in that race if he was driving the Racing Bull?
I don't think so.
No, not
Why
really.
Not? Isaac Hadjar was 11th on the grid.
Well, yes, but we cannot take any conclusions from the first race, I think. But first, I'm not the biggest fan of Liam Lawson. I think he's a talented driver, but I don't think, at least for now, he's better than, let's say, Yuki Tsunoda. And with that car, it is obvious that everybody is going to struggle against Verstappen.
But this is not about struggling against Max Verstappen, struggling against the rest of the grid. Like, he's qualifying like on the back 2 rows. Like, he can't get out of Q1. I mean, this is not struggling against Max Verstappen, because he should bare minimum get into Q3. And this is the case for every Red Bull driver since they got into F1. Not into F1, but into the team. And they can't do it. And this is not because they're bad drivers. And this is not because Max Verstappen is so great, because Michael Schumacher's teammates, Ayrton Senna's teammates, heck, even Sebastian Vettel's teammate, Mark Webber, none of them have been this far behind their teammate. And those are all historically great drivers. So I think this is an issue with the car. And I think that whoever is put in that car, the second driver, is just set up to fail.
Well, probably yes, but going on the contrary side, do you think that Max is going to get like better than P3 with RB? I think it was obvious from the beginning that whoever the second driver is for this season, he would be sacrificed at that point. And I don't particularly support that decision, but I can say that I understand it, because you want to have the best out of that car with Verstappen like behind the wheel, because if you can have regularly P3s, P4s, P5s from Verstappen in a pretty bad car, what is the point of having like an alright car and Max like being P7, P8 and having like P9, P10 with the second driver?
Why would he be that much worse though, if he's the best driver on the grid?
because there is something in Red Bull. I don't think any of us can explain like what exactly is Max doing with this car. And like, imagine Red Bull if they were like, okay, we can make the car better, but we're going to make it worse, like only for Verstappen to drive it. That doesn't make sense.
But that's what they're doing.
You cannot say that they're making their car worse on purpose.
They're not trying to make their car worse, but they're making it so that, I mean, like, obviously they'll listen to Max Verstappen more, but Max Verstappen's driving style is so unique that the way that this car handles is so inconsistent. And I mean, we see it with Liam Lawson constantly. I mean, he is struggling to turn that car in, and then sometimes he turns it in and the car goes too much. Like, you don't know what to predict with this. And this is why Daniel Ricciardo also left this team, because they started catering it towards Max Verstappen. He didn't enjoy it, and years later, like, that is proven to be true, because 4 drivers, none of them can understand that car. 4 drivers.
I told you, I don't particularly support that decision, but when you have the best driver on the grid, of course you're going to care for him and you're going to like try to get the best out of him, because whoever is in the second seat, you don't want to sacrifice like your probability of having great performances, podium performances, just so that the second driver can get to the points. Like whoever, even if the car was better, let me put it that way, Liam Lawson is an average driver. He's not one of the best talents on the grid. Even if he was in this McLaren, I think he would have been like very far away from Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri. So I think this is just acting like a scapegoat for Red Bull. Like whoever was in that second seat, he's not going to perform. Things are not going to look great for him. But for now, this is the situation. So I think we can move on, because we spent like 7 minutes discussing the second seat at Red Bull.
Okay, I'll move on with, again, mentioning Kimi Antonelli. He was given a 5-second penalty for impeding in the pit lane, or an unsafe release. Yeah. But then it was later overturned and his race became from good to better. I mean, as we said, he managed to keep that car out of the wall throughout the whole 57 laps. He did some great overtakes. He overtook Alex Albon at the end of the race. He's an 18-year-old driver, just to like point it out. I was really impressed by this guy, and that's why he is my highlight of the weekend, because this comeback drive, it showed maturity beyond the level of an 18-year-old driver, at least for me.
And just quickly to mention, there was a very strange decision from, I think it was Ollie Behrman when he was rejoining the grid. I don't know if you remember, but it was a very strange decision of him to like go and stop the faster car. In this case, it was Verstappen, I think, that was behind him. And I think Haas or all the teams in general, they should find a way to like safely rejoin after a pit stop, because we've seen this a couple of times, like crashes or just some problems happening because of that. And I think that there should be like serious penalties for everybody who is like, because when you're rejoining and other cars are faster than you, you're a long way behind them, don't stop them, don't sacrifice their race.
I mean, to be fair, it was safety car conditions, so the drivers weren't driving particularly fast. And also Haas were just being even dumber than they were before that race, as they stayed out on the inters, everyone was on dries. And the lap before the safety car ends, all right, we're coming in for dries, even though it proceeds to rain in the next like 5 laps. I thought Haas were going to be geniuses. And they pit Behrman after he unlaps himself and put him back in the safety car line. I mean, just that is terrible from Haas. But back to Kimi Antonelli. He's also my highlight of the weekend. Great drive, super impressive, amazing overtakes, great strategy, and yeah, finished just behind George Russell, P4, got the team points to be level on top for the constructors with McLaren, which I didn't think anyone thought Mercedes could achieve at the start of the weekend. But here we are, and I think this bodes great for his season. I expect him to be consistently like a contender with the top teams, and he proved in this race that he can overtake and he can fight other cars. So I'm loving Kimi Antonelli, and I'm only expecting the best things from him this season.
I also want to acknowledge that this Kimi Antonelli performance was very, very promising, and despite Great drive from Lando Norris and Red Bull struggling car. My highlight of the weekend was definitely Ferrari, and it was in a negative way because I think people were expecting much more of them, and this race, everything that could have went wrong. Like, they both managed to get points, but before the weekend, if you ask a Ferrari fan, they would be like, oh yeah, I want both cars on the podium, we have high hopes and everything. And we even discussed it last week with our predictions, and everything just went down and it wasn't looking good for Ferrari. I hope they can turn it around. I want to have competition. I want to see like Hamilton and Leclerc perform at their best, but this weekend it was mediocre for Ferrari. And moving on to surprise and disappointments of the weekend, I can start with mine. Actually, a lot of surprises, I think, but probably when we look at the end result, it is Lance Stroll and Nico Hülkenberg, because Lance Stroll, we know who he is. We even said it last week that I don't expect anything interesting from Lance Stroll, and in the first race, he managed to get 8 more points than I expected for him to get throughout the whole season. And also with Hülkenberg, Sauber, their car is looking a bit better than the last season, definitely. And he managed to get more points than Sauber managed to get like the previous year. So I think that was a great drive for him. Like, nothing impressive from him, but at the same time, in the rain, even if you manage to get the right decisions and to stay like pretty comfortable in the top 10 as it was at the end of the race, I think it is a very positive weekend both for him, and despite Bortoletto's crash, I think it was a pretty positive weekend for Sauber.
So my surprise of the weekend is Alex Albon. Even though the Williams showed promising pace, I expected him to be behind Carlos Sainz, but as Sainz crashed, Alex Albon was like the team leader and he managed the P6, so good job. And I mean, an obvious disappointment of the weekend is Ferrari, as already discussed. Quite on the low side. Let's see if they can come back in China.
Yeah, plenty of disappointments. Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, who actually didn't really talk about, but he crashed under the safety car in lap 1. And Carlos Sainz, I think many people expected him to have a great race. And Haas were also nowhere. But my disappointment is Helmut Marko, because even though Helmut Marko in the past has said dumb stuff and idiotic comments, they seem to progressively get worse and worse. It's like he's like the F1 version of Kanye West, you know? He just is totally unhinged and doesn't care about what anyone else will tell him. But he said Gabriel Bortoleto is a B-tier driver. I think he said Jack Doohan was a C-tier driver. Both of them outperformed Liam Lawson, just saying. And also he said that Isaac Hadjar, a driver he himself appointed, that what he did was embarrassing. Like, why are you bringing down these rookies, like the first race of their career, and you're like basically trying to peer pressure them into quitting racing? I mean, this is just terrible, and I don't know what he's still doing in this sport. I feel like he's one of the main factors for the toxicity that happens in Red Bull, but he is like out of control. He needs to be like suspended or something, because I honestly can't stand him, and I don't think anyone actually likes him in the paddock or outside of the paddock. So he needs to stop doing this stuff because it is idiotic. I really can't stand him. My surprise of the weekend is actually McLaren, and not that they were first or anything, but it was the fact that they had quite a comfortable gap in qualifying, and in the race they really pulled away from everyone. So concerning signs, as this was expected to be a very close F1 season, of course it's only round 1, but that pace was very impressive from McLaren and from Lando Norris. Shout out to him. We did not talk about him this whole review actually, but great race, kept it cool under pressure when Max Verstappen was right behind him, and won the race and is now leading the championship.
And for Helmut Marko, even to clarify, I don't think he said that the performance was embarrassing from Hadjar. He said that it was embarrassing for him to cry after this performance, which is even worse. And I've always defended Red Bull, but I don't think Marko currently in the whole Red Bull structure is in position to criticize anybody with the car that they're giving. And overall, they're so reliant on Max Verstappen right now. And I think this is the only reason currently Red Bull are above the water. But things are not looking great, and Helmut Marko seems to be going crazy. And my disappointment of the weekend, all the rookies except Kimi Antonelli. I said at the beginning of this podcast that very tough luck for them to be in that situation, like to have changing weather on a tricky track like Australia. But at the same time, if you want to be the best, you have to stand up in situations like this and perform at your best. And this shows like who the real talent is, and who are the drivers that, yeah, they can be good on their day, but you cannot expect them like to be amazing. Like, not for all the rookies. I'm sure that they can turn things around, but I think it was disappointing to see 5 DNFs from the rookies. And going to predictions for the next week, let's start with Harry.
Okay, as you were talking about rookies, my first prediction is that all 6 rookies, counting Liam Lawson, will finish the race, which may be shocking, but let's see. And second one, another interesting one, Ferrari will be on the podium.
I mean, that's ambitious, I would say. But my predictions are George Russell will win the race. Now, George Russell was great in Australia, and I think that car is better than what people give it credit for. And I think China suits it even more. And yeah, George Russell winning it. I mean, yeah, McLaren are probably the best, but they have shown in the past that they can trip over themselves, and they almost did in Australia as well. So yeah, give me George Russell to win that race. And Isaac Hadjar will finish in the points. I'm confident in him, even though he crashed on the formation lap. He showed good pace, was fairly close to Yuki Tsunoda all weekend, and I see the hunger in him and the fire to do well, and I'm confident that he will do well in China.
I just want to remind you that only a week ago, when we had our predictions done, when I said that no Ferrari will be on the podium, you were looking at me like a crazy person.
But I predicted Lando Norris to win the race, so there is that.
Yeah, definitely, but yeah, I knew there is something sketchy with Ferrari.
I predicted Leclerc P2. Anyways, your predictions for China.
Yeah, my predictions for China, as always, this is not even, I'm not even going to include it in the predictions, but just to mention it, that I think the sprint would be super boring, and I hate sprints. I think everybody hates sprints, and like only F1 officials, they don't hate sprints. They like to make money from them, and I understand it, but I don't like it. My predictions are that one of the Mercedes cars would be outside of the points. Whether it would be DNF, some problems, some strange strategy, I have a good feeling that something is going to get wrong, but we'll see. And the other one is that Oscar Piastri is going to win 2nd week in a row. I believe that Piastri is going to get that win, and I believe that Piastri is going to be very competitive this season. And I hope it would start from this week. If it's not Verstappen, let it be Oscar Piastri to win that race.
So, are you just gonna predict Oscar Piastri to win every race until he wins a race?
Well, no, even after he wins the race, I would continue to predict it.
Sure. Okay, well, hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. This is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook. And stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
If you no longer go for God that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.